so those were my kids, but this is the real deal. I was going to say that, it's been a great honor to be here today, to be invited by OpenIO and present in front of you. And I was going to start with saying how beautiful the city of Paris is, and it's incredible to be here amongst you. But my God, I have to say the slippers are the best. So just a brief background on what IDC is. IDC is a 50-plus year market research company. I've been with the company for about 14 years now, predominantly covering the storage market for a very long time. Over the last 6 years, I've been covering file and object-based storage. And here I am today to present some of the research findings, some of the survey findings that we've uncovered from last year. So from an agenda perspective, we're going to talk about what we call as digital transformation, what a lot of end users are going through, some of the influencing factors that are driving the change, the digital transformation, some of the current investments, if end users are transforming their data centers from one technology to the other, what are the driving forces, and then what are the current investments. We will then also talk about the issues and concerns about the technology that are put in place. And finally, we'll talk about some of the predictions and changes that we should expect in the industry. All right? So IDC has has coined a term called the third platform. And we say that the third platform is driving the digital transformation. So what do we mean by the digital transformation? So I imagine most of us have a social account. How many of us have a social account, like a Twitter or a LinkedIn or anything else, right? How many of us have at least one mobile smart device? All of us, at least a couple now. How many of us use the cloud, for example, to store our files? Plenty of us, right? And then how many of us are served ads based on our choices on the internet, right? So that's big data. So those are our 4 pillars of the third platform. Those are the 4 pillars that are driving change. So how are these 4 pillars driving change? Each one of them has a consequence. What are the consequences? So increased collaboration from a lot of social network activity, right? From the mobile devices, it's a lot of data generation. We've seen unstructured data being generated at a rapid pace, but also stored for an extended period of time at a rapid pace. That is being now then analyzed for better productivity and bettering the services and products. And cloud is offering the scale that's needed for any new venture, any new workload, any new greenfield workload that organizations are planning. Right, so net, all of these 4 pillars of the third platform are driving infrastructure investments. All right? We ran a survey last year that had about more than 1,000 respondents worldwide. And we specifically asked the question, what is your company targeting? Meaning, which of the following describes your organization's main strategies when it comes to overall IT infrastructure? What are they thinking about? Are they thinking about cost saving? Are they thinking about adopting private cloud, public cloud? Are they thinking about managed storage services? Or are they thinking about, we'll figure it out as we go. We don't know what we want, but as we go along, we'll figure it out. Or are they very specifically thinking about what we have today and what are we going to do in the next 5 years based on our needs? 72% of the respondents said that investing in IT to support digital transformation is one of their key agendas. It's on their strategy. So they're very actively thinking about what to do in the future, right? So again, going back to the 4 pillars of the third platform and going back to what we have found in the survey, what would be the technologies that end users are considering today, right? So from a technology perspective, we found from our research that there are 4 of these main buckets that actively end users are looking to adopt. Flash, Enrico talked about NVMe and OpenIO. Software-defined storage, that's one of the key technologies today from a perspective of cost savings, scalability, moving away from proprietary hardware, software bundled solutions and such. Convergent infrastructure for compute, storage, and networking, and also private and public cloud for scalability, ease of use, and such. So let's talk about software-defined storage for a little bit. So software-defined storage, as we all know, supports file, block, and object. IDC defines it as being able to be deployed on any commodity hardware. Enrico talked about even ARM servers and x86 servers. Therefore, the software makes no underlying assumptions on the hardware that it is running on. So it's independent. It can be procured separately, or nowadays a lot of vendors are partnering with providers, server providers who provide commodity component-based servers, right? So when we talk about software-defined storage, obviously object is a part of it. And from the survey results, this was a separate survey that we ran in North America of 450 respondents who are concurrent users, meaning users of file-based storage and object-based storage at the same time. So file-based storage has been around for a really long time. We know that. Object has been around for a long time also. But the adoption of object storage especially has increased in the last couple of years. And what are the reasons for some of this? In many of our conversations with end users, we find that pretty much to the point where an end user is beginning to manage 5 to 7 file appliances, that's when management becomes very difficult, performance becomes very challenging, and also maintenance becomes an overhead. And that's a point in time when a lot of end users realize that they have to move to a new technology that will make all of these 3 things easier, right? So we have object storage here, but software-defined storage is available in many different flavors, and by flavors I mean deployment models. We have appliances, we have software only that's deployed on commodity hardware, we have open source software that's deployed on commodity hardware, we have managed private platforms, managed services, and we also have public cloud. So the survey says that 19% of end users are using appliances, 22% are using software only on commodity hardware, 17% are using open source, and 23% managed private cloud, and 19% public cloud. So we'll get to the public cloud in a little bit, but I want to highlight the software only sections. And the software only sections can be both the 22% for commercial software, meaning software that you pay for, and then 17% for open source software that is freely available that end users can choose to deploy on their own and choose to develop on their own as well, right? So these 2 are being fairly adopted in the marketplace today. The rate of adoption is high. And most likely the next question is, what are the workloads that object storage is serving today? What are the workloads and how are they changing from the previous years? So in our mind, for the longest time, we think that object is mainly for archival, but the next slide will show us how it's changing a little bit, right? So if we look to the right, this is a multi-select question. So if we look to the right, we have a fair amount of end users saying that they use object storage for backup, disaster recovery, active archive, and archive. One thing I want to point out is from our research, on an ongoing basis, we found out the differentiating points between backup and archival are shrinking. And that's why you will see this bit of an anomaly here, where backup is higher than archival, because we think that end users don't quite make that distinction anymore. But the critical point is here. That a lot of end users are now beginning to move object storage really to a secondary tier, and in many cases, a production tier as well. So from cold storage, over the last 5 years, it's slow and steady making pace, making its way into secondary and primary workloads, all right? So if we think about these workloads, we also then have to think about the deployment location. Where are end users deploying this? Are they deploying it in their traditional data centers, or are they deploying this in cloud? And by cloud, I mean private and public both. So the next slide talks about that. The survey results, I didn't put the statistics around here, but these were by far the traditional workloads, collaboration workloads, content applications, IT infrastructure, business apps. They all continue to remain on traditional object stores in the traditional data centers. What's kind of moving to private and public is the new cloud-native kind of applications, web serving, media streaming, data analytics, and test and dev, okay? So why are these workloads moving to the cloud, or why are they taking off in the cloud on object storage, right? What are the factors that are influencing the choices of object storage deployment location? So we'll see that in the next slide. So a couple of things that are very critical is the sensitivity of data. You know, a lot of end users are not quite certain, especially, you know, you guys are all from, most of you guys are from Europe. So with the changes in GDPR, the implementations of it, you probably know that things have changed for you, and you may not be able to use the public cloud as easily as you would have prior to May of this year. So data sensitivity forces end users to use object storage in traditional and private cloud environments. And then the other thing that is also common in the top 3 influencers is data protection techniques. That you can, that you have a little bit more control on your traditional data centers and also the private infrastructure of object storage. You have a little bit more control. You know in detail where your data is, how your data is protected, as opposed to public cloud, where there's a lot of trial and error at this point in time. I was talking to several end users who are using file services in the cloud today, and one of the feedback that I got was there's a huge amount of learning curve. Learning curve from, let's say they are using Amazon versus let's say they are using Google. They have to understand the ecosystem of every single hyperscale environment to be able to deploy their workloads and their data in the public clouds. That learning curve is pretty huge. And then we've had some cases of breach as well, which kind of puts the end users on the edge in terms of decisions about public cloud. But where public cloud is generally used is new initiatives. And there is also a concept that public cloud is cheap. Yes, it is cheap, but in only certain cases. It's not cheap all the time. I've had end users who have calculated the cost of using, let's say, a hyperscale provider for the period of 5 to 10 years. And they have, the analysis that they have conducted have helped them understand that in the first 5 years, from year 1 to year 5, the public cloud is fairly cheap. As opposed to owning your own infrastructure. But year 5 to year 10 is where I can see somebody nodding here. So year 5 to year 10 is where the costs are several times unknown and in many cases very expensive, right? So those are the few influencers why a certain deployment model is used for object storage. So now Enrico talked about speed, right? Being smart. And AI is one of the popular, you can call it use cases or workloads or a new segment of the market, what have you. But AI is, artificial intelligence is fairly hot in the market. So I have a little trivia for you guys, okay? So how many milliseconds do we take to blink? Anybody wants to take a guess? How much time to blink do we take? 300 milliseconds. How much time does it take for Google to show the search results? Anyone? Come on, guys. You can be wrong. That's fine. 200 milliseconds, all right? And then how much time does it take for a helicopter's rotor to go around? 185 milliseconds, right? And sorry, my slides are weird today. And for the airbags to deploy, to save a person in an accident, it takes 60 to 80 milliseconds. But for AI to detect fraud, for fraud analysis, how many milliseconds does it take? And I'm sorry if the slides don't work properly, but bear with me, this is very interesting. 40 to 60 milliseconds. You see, it is faster than saving a person's life in a car. Okay, so any next generation technology has to be really fast, right? So what makes a new technology fast? So Enrico talked about Flash and NVMe, and we asked that question in the survey. How often are end users deploying Flash in their object storage, right? So 56% of the 450 respondents said that they are deploying Flash. And the reasons why they are deploying Flash in their object store is because they're using it as a staging tier to make it fast, right, for them. Eventually, there is a small percentage of end users that are supporting Flash as a persistent storage, but that portion of the market where Flash is used as persistent storage, we expect that in the next 2 to 3 years will become a bigger pool, but not quite yet, okay? The other factor that we asked was, everybody thinks that object storage is cheap, okay, relatively affordable than many other technologies. But who has done the actual analysis of what were the perceived benefits versus what were the actual benefits, right? What did you think this technology was going to give you, but what did the technology actually give you in the end? So we asked that question, and this is the next slide. It's very interesting that for the most part, the reduced CapEx, OpEx in here, so the expected is in gray, and the actual benefits achieved is in green. So in most cases, reduced CapEx, OpEx, reduced provisioning times, ease of management, the actual achieved benefits are slightly lower than the expected. So we expect more, but we get a little bit less. But there are a couple of sections where the actual benefits achieved in the end are higher. So no vendor lock-in. So basically, I was talking to one of the customers yesterday, and they said that they had some issues with a particular server vendor, and then they had to switch. So they were able to switch to a different vendor when they found some hardware issues, right? And improve flexibility. So by improved flexibility, we talked about the different deployment models. You can buy it as an appliance, you can buy it as a software only. In many cases, the software only vendors have a partnership with hardware providers like HPE or Cisco or Supermicro, what have you, and they bring to market a bundled appliance. And from an appliance perspective, we are not talking about any proprietary hardware. We are really talking about x86. It's just ease of procurement. It's one single line item, right? So, and then you can deploy it as private cloud. You can, buy cloud-based services from hyperscalers. So there's a lot of flexibility that Object Store can offer, right? And that's one of the key factors of influencing and the use of object storage as well. But to go further along, cloud being the heavyweight in the room, being, in many cases, being on the roadmap and on the strategy for many end users, there have been questions about the viability, long-term viability of putting your data into the cloud, and how often do people bring the data back from the cloud, realizing that it's not suitable to them. So the next question is about the repatriation of data. You put the data into the public cloud and you bring it back. How often does it happen, right? So pardon me for the busy slide, but this will help you guys. Almost 46% of the respondents say that they bring the data back from public cloud to either on-prem or managed private cloud or private cloud that is managed by themselves. And the reasons are because of security and price. So this kind of goes back to long-term expenses with the public cloud versus what you can manage to do with a software-defined or an open source object-based storage platform. Okay, so net, what we are expecting from what we are expecting from having spoken to a lot of end users and having spoken to a lot of the end users here, having run surveys, is that end users need to have an open mindset and need to consider that object storage can be used for newer workloads. It's not a platform just for archival and backup. There are new products in the market today that support the kind of performance you need, the kind of costs, the budget that you have, and basically object storage will move a tier up in storage, slow and steady over the next several years. So do expect that tier 1 storage won't be limited only to file services, but you will have object stores being deployed. I've personally spoken to at least 5 end users who are using object store today in production environments, tier 1 environments, and that is just the tip of the iceberg. I'm sure that there are many more customers that we haven't had a chance to speak to, but on average, these customers have about 10 to 15 petabytes of data on production in object stores, tier 1, right? Newer workloads and also deployment models. When you buy a software-only product, it's not necessary that you have to deploy it in your on-prem. You can deploy it as private cloud. You can have someone else, a third party, manage it for you. In many cases, you can deploy the commercial software even in hyperscale environments to be able to extend your on-prem or private cloud to the public cloud. So just have a completely open frame of mind to adopt object storage for your new workloads. And one of the things that I would highly recommend is take stock of what you have today and try and understand where you are going to go in the future. And it's only then that you can make the right strategic investments that our previous slide talked about, where 72% said that making the right IT infrastructure decisions was on their roadmap. So only when you know today what you're going to do, and in 5 years what you need, if you have an idea of that, then you will find vendors that will be able to help you more specifically. So that's it from me. It's been a pleasure to be here, and thank you very much.